Good afternoon, everyone. I've been looking forward to this for a really long time. I mean, first when you approached me about sick architecture, and then Mark, you thought, well, maybe we could also launch something else. The double whammy is really quite extraordinary, and it might be why this room is filling up to its corners. I have to put in a little pitch for sort of what's been happening for us for the last 2 days, because somehow it feels relevant. We have the RIBA with us for our revalidation. And there's something about the sort of the clean and the dirty, the infected and disinfected, that feels very apt when it comes to the world of how we think about whatever we call practice, whatever we call architecture, and how we find a way of discovering and realizing the metrics that define its worth. And somehow I was first moved very much by the piece on your diary in COVID, and then also the pieces on kind of the cordon sanitaire, and how you divide between the ordered world and the disordered world, how we make the transition from living with bacteria to the kind of the wonderful world where you can buy a cream to make a microbiome on your face. But there is something so essential to the interweaving of the clean and the dirty, and to the very moving and emotional journey that is to be together and then also in isolation. Somehow thinking about COVID now feels mysteriously far away and like a distant memory, like a dream that we lived through at a time when all of those, I suppose, intimacies and the strangeness of our domestic setting, of the empty streets, of the spaces, again, kind of sanitized for basic kind of human interaction, feel quite bizarre. And yet they sort of underpin so much of the way in which we understand the built environment. We take photographs of buildings with no people. We understand things as inevitably new. How we live in a world that is forever evolving, that is aging, that is being built and rebuilt, infected and disinfected. Feels like it's a perfect moment to bring both of you, and Nick later, and Guillermo also, to the table. But we're going to have 2 back-to-back presentations of these 2 wonderful books, and I'm going to start with you, Beatriz, with Sick Architecture. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yeah, great. I'm so happy to be here in my favorite school of architecture and my favorite bookstore. You guys have no idea how lucky you are, because there are no bookstores like that anywhere in the world where you can go in and find so many amazing books of architecture. There are no bookstores, period, anywhere. So it's that an unbelievable privilege to be a student in a school of architecture that has this bookstore attached to you. I mean, I will kill for that. Anyway, seriously, I'm going to present this big book. We have a big book, Sick Architecture, and a little book with the bacteria. Sick Architecture I did with Nick Axel and with Guillermo Arsuaga, and with the bacteria with Mark Wigley. So it's all collaborations. In this context of this School of Architecture, it may be worth to start talking about the fact that this book, Sick Architecture, started as a series of PhD seminars in the School of Architecture, in the PhD program, that ran, believe it or not, between 2017 and 2021. That is before the pandemic. I was already teaching a class called Architecture in the Age of Pandemics, right? When the pandemic struck, students would come to me and say, how did you know? And I said, well, I don't know, I didn't know, but I'm not a witch. I know, maybe I am, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so the seminar explored a wide range of diseases and their impact on architecture and the city, particularly Black City, cholera, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, malaria, sick building syndrome, HIV, Ebola, allergies, ADD, Alzheimer, autism, addiction, burnout syndrome, you name it, and we thought about it, right? Despite the presence in our discussions of recent epidemics like Ebola or SARS, etc., or HNI, we didn't think, we thought of pandemic as something distant in space or in time. Oh, that happens over there, right? Or in time, the plagues, etc. So in the middle of this, COVID-19 was kind of an uncanny arrival that all of a sudden made the research much more immediate and much more urgent. And then it's when, in the middle of this terrible moment in which the students and I were all confined to our apartments, and students were particularly depressed because they couldn't travel as they normally do to wherever their research takes them, and they were stuck in Princeton. And then I got a call from Nicholas Higgs. And Nicholas goes like, weren't you teaching a class on pandemics? I said, yeah, I was teaching a class on pandemics, because I thought that maybe we could run a series in efflux architecture, and we decided to do this. So in partnership with Nick and Nicholas, we ran this series of articles, which are preliminary versions of what appears in the book, which were papers coming out of the seminar that we carefully edited, right? And the idea was to contribute to this ongoing discourse on the current pandemic that was starting to happen. Not so much talking about that particular pandemic, but looking back at the history of pandemics and the impact on architecture. And then we also invited, this is the table of contents in the book, where you can see that actually there are many people there that are not in any way students, people like Brooke Holmes or Emily Apter or David Gissen or Elizabeth Povinelli or Fabiola Lopez Duran or Samia Geni. So real scholars that were already in the world, and people that in the meantime have graduated and have become professors somewhere else. So in the end, the book combines what were then students' papers with another set of, it's kind of half and half scholars and scholars in preparation, right? In 2022, we partnered also with Nicholas Higgs and Silvia Francisconi from the THIBA in Brussels to exhibit Sikh architecture. And again, we added more scholars, artists, and architects. In fact, the book in many ways captures this collaborative, multidimensional process. Kirsten Gears did the design of the exhibition in an echo of the Parallel of Life and Art in the independent group exhibition in London of 1953 that you probably are very familiar with. We thought about clouds of information with some major artworks by artists, such as this one that you see at the end, Sami Balogi piece on the cordon sanitaire in Congo that Ingrid just mentioned, and here is a close-up with one of the curators at THIBA, and I will talk about it later. Pieces like this one, Vivian Kachuri Mosquito Shrine, which is a large embroidery piece on netting, which tells the story of the arrival of the European colonists to the New World through the lens of the mosquito, precisely. So there is all these artworks. We also had a new film that Dylan and Escofidio had done at that time called Exhaustion on 2021, right after COVID, which was all about being out of breath of COVID and also the death of George Floyd, of course. We also have a number of kind of artifacts, like the Alto Museum lends us the equipment of a bedroom in the Paimio Sanatorium. We have an iron lung, and we have many of these other things, but just to give you a sense of the exhibition. So let's get on with the book now. And I want to start precisely with COVID, and what you see, here is a grid of empty beds in a very dark, cavernous space, waiting for bodies, right? I mean, this is one architecture you can say inside another. This is a field hospital that was put up in, you probably are familiar with these striking images, in Madrid to accommodate 5,500 patients in IFEMA, which is a convention center. So buildings that are designed for temporary events like conventions, all of a sudden we're holding an emergency architecture, a space for disease. But this didn't happen just in Madrid. The scene was repeated all over the world, from Belgrade here to Lahore, Wuhan, Kuala Lumpur, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, New York. Here is the Javis Center in New York, all turned into a hospital again. But even more striking, this was not the first time at all. During the 1918 flu epidemic, which you may not know, that killed more people than World War I and World War II combined. Huge empty spaces, such as the ones that you see in the screen, were filled also with beds. You have this photograph, for example, in Kansas. It's a U.S. Army camp in Kansas. By the way, Kansas is the place where the virus originated, despite the fact that they call it the Spanish flu. I can tell you the story of why it's the Spanish flu, because it's kind of funny. The Spanish didn't enter World War I, and therefore there was no censura. How do you say censura? Censorship. In the sense that we could say whatever we wanted in the newspapers, and in other places you couldn't say anything bad. So people were dying all over the place, but not in Spain. They say, well, there is a flu going around that I don't know, right? So it became known as the Spanish flu, despite the fact that it has come from Kansas to Europe via the soldiers, and eventually ended up in Spain, which is the only country that decided that this was actually news and that people should be taken care. Anyway, in health emergencies, this is the point of these images, all buildings are medicalized, and public discourse, interestingly, becomes architectural, right? Medical crisis in a way bring architecture to the foreground. Yet the book argues that chic architecture is not at all the architecture of emergencies, but is the architecture of normality, the way in which past health crises are always inscribed into the everyday. Each architecture carries the traces of prior diseases and has been in many ways shaped by them. In fact, you can argue, as this fellow already argued, that architectural illnesses are always entangled, that the beginning of architecture coincides with the beginning of disease. This Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson put it this way in his introduction to Our Homes and How to Make Them Healthy, which is a compendium of texts by architects and doctors. Believe it or not, they were collaborating still at that point, in 1884 for the famous International Health Exhibition in London, where you can see there is a lot of architecture. I will talk a little bit about that later. But this is the point that he says, I will read only the last part of the quote: man, in constructing protection from exposure has constructed the conditions for disease. That is, all architecture, you can say, is sick. There is no architecture without disease. This is what he's telling you. In constructing protection, we have this is already demonstrated in many things, as we will talk later with Mark. But recent excavation in the Neolithic has demonstrated that diseases that did not exist before appear precisely the moment we went indoors, right? So he didn't know, but he knew, right? The doctors and architects in that sense have always been in a kind of dance, exchanging roles, collaborating, influencing each other. In a way, furniture, as you can see here in this illustration, is also important. Furniture, cities, parks, buildings, and infrastructure are all produced by medical emergencies that layer on top of one another. And this is the crazy thing. We tend to forget very quickly what produced these layers. As long as an epidemic passes, we develop all of our developed collective amnesia, right? We forget about it, right? For example, we were all shocked when we were asked to put masks during COVID, but those masks are not at all different from the ones that people in the 1918 flu were wearing. These are voluntaries in the Red Cross, or even if you go back, already in the 17th century, medical doctors such as this one, plague doctors, will go around with this mask with a very long beak, so that to people at bay, right? So it's the distance again, right? And it also, the mask have a space where you could put scented herbs, because the dominant theory of disease was miasma theory. So as long as you could counter the bad smell, then you were not contagious. Okay, whatever. It's not correct, but that's what they believe, right? But masks were already there. Well, think, for example, about the parallelism between these two images, Palermo, cholera epidemic of 1835, and images that those of us living in New York during the early days of the pandemic became kind of frighteningly used to see in the streets. A vehicle stops, two medics dressed as astronauts pick up a patient, basically encased in a plastic container, almost reminiscent of 1960s architecture, right? But we forget about it. We don't know that this. So the parallel is the two people picking up a body, the bake or waiting, etc. But in fact, we can go back historically even much more. The relationship between architecture and health is ancient. Vitruvius already in the 1st century BC established Western architectural theory by insisting that all architects needed to study medicine. For all the students of architecture now here, if you think that we don't have enough studying architecture now, we have to study medicine as well. Hello. This is because, according to Vitruvius, health is the most important objective of an architect. And he devotes a large part of these 10 books of architecture to the question of health, giving very detailed instructions on how to determine whether the site of a new city is healthy by returning to the ancient method of sacrificing an animal and inspecting the liver, and if the liver is firm and sound, then that's a good place for a city. But what is also very, very interesting is that he argues in reverse, that those that are already sick, those that are already unwell, can be cured by architecture. So it's super fascinating that you already see in Vitruvius the idea that architecture can be both a form of prevention, you put yourself in a healthy place, but if you happen to be sick, then architecture can cure you as well. And among the diseases that he mentioned is consumption, and consumption is an old word for tuberculosis. So you can already see in Vitruvius the idea that architecture can cure tuberculosis, something that in the 20th century, as you may have read in X-ray architecture, we're still at it, right? So cities in a way represent an accumulation of theories of disease from ancient times to the present. The history of this architecture, the history of the city, could also be said the history of disease, the history of a series of structures and infrastructures, like the lazarettos, for example, in Venice or in Milan, put in place precisely to counter the previous epidemic. We are always one step behind, you can say, right? Think, for example, about the great infrastructure wars of the 19th century, the sewage systems, the clean water, urban grids, parks, etc., that completely reshaped cities in the name of health. And since we are here in London, how about the embankment of London that is so much celebrated, that we all love in terms of this great manifestation of civic architecture, etc. But few people understand that this was a response to the great epidemics of cholera and typhoid fever in the 19th century, and particularly the great stink of London of 1858. That is, the embankment of London contained the new sewage system that will prevent all these epidemics. Jumping very quickly to the 20th century, something that people don't understand at all, and is super interesting, is that modern architecture was also produced under emergency conditions. Throughout the late 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, millions were dying of tuberculosis every year all over the world. In cities like Paris or London, was 1 in 3 people was dying of tuberculosis. Globally, it was between 1 and 4 and 1 and 5. So this is crazy compared with COVID, for example, right? And modern buildings precisely offer a prophylactic defense against this invisible microorganism. It's amazing to me how much we could have forgotten this, when in fact magazines of architecture, still in 1952, this Revista de Arquitectura de Madrid is presenting modern architecture superimposed to an X-ray of the lungs and the sun, as if we could even miss the connection, if we had missed the connection up to 1952, that modern architecture was conceived and designed to counter a great threat, which was tuberculosis. So you can argue that all the defining features of modern architecture, white wall, terraces, big windows, detachment from the ground, even exercise, were presented as form of prevention and cure. In fact, it was not until 1928 that the first modern antibiotic, penicillin, was accidentally discovered by Alexander Fleming when he observed that mold stopped bacteria. But in fact, modern architecture, you can say, was already an antibiotic. There was already an antibiotic philosophy in architecture. Architecture was modern in as much as was free of bacteria. Think again about the entrance of Villa Savoye. You have seen this picture millions of times, right? We have all talked about it in terms of the beauty of these plumbing fixtures that so much fascinated Le Corbusier that he thought that they should be in a museum of the 20th century, right? But in fact, what he's telling us, and after COVID it's difficult to miss the point, is that as you enter the house, you wash your hands, right? This is very close to the 1918 epidemic, right? So people already, it's kind of funny how little we think about that, how these big crises have affected the way in which architecture is designed, in which we think about it. Right. Okay, so yeah, it's very important to understand that architecture was modern as long as it was free of bacteria, and in that sense you can also say that modern architecture saved lives in an age in which the typical age expectancy was 40 and most people were dying for bacterial diseases. Modern architecture created this kind of healthy environment, but like antibiotics, it created its own monsters eventually, right? Modern architecture produces illnesses. Most obviously, you have the sick building syndrome, in which the air, this is a sick syndrome building or sick building syndrome in Japan, but they are all over the place. The air conditioning system that Le Corbusier so much celebrated for isolating the air from the contaminated outside turned out to be reservoirs of disease. And as we will discuss with Mark in the next presentation, which is the Bacterial, that in many ways follows these questions, reducing the diversity of bacteria has been a disaster for humans and a disaster for the planet. So this is the consequence in many, and this is the crazy thing, that architecture is implicated in this reduction of bacteria. But I'm not going to go much into it because Mark and I are going to do this in the next presentation. All these layers, and I'm going to go now into the content a little bit of the SIG architecture, because all these layers of SIG architecture is important to understand that are inherently political. To think in terms of SIG architecture is to recognize, for example, that all borders of a room or of a nation, are medical. This is reinforced by countless protocols and policing. Think, for example, about Ellis Island, with Guillermo S wrote a beautiful article in this book, SIG architecture and all the procedures to control immigration. Still today, entering the United States, a question of health there. You know, when I did my green card, I have to still do the tuberculosis to demonstrate that I didn't have tuberculosis. This is only some years ago. This is Angel Island. You may not know that so much in San Francisco, where the main entrance of Asian immigrants was also control of health. Here you have these little kids going through all this examination, and the bunk beds where all the people that were detained were living. SIG architecture is always multi-scalar, traversing different territories, nation, ethnicity, race, class, and domesticities. Many of the essays in the collection also show the violent exercise, of course, of colonial power, which is inseparable from the architecture of health. We have already mentioned this, Ingrid mentioned it, in the Belgian Congo, for example, a 400 meters wide band, which was the distance that they thought the mosquito could only fly, and could not fly more than 400 meters, separated the city of the Europeans from the indigenous city in the name of preventing yellow fever. Always with the idea that it's the indigenous that are with the disease, when in fact it's the Europeans, of course, that are more prone to the disease. So in many ways you can say the mosquito dimension the city, which is fascinating. Likewise, with the construction of the Panama Canal, is another beautiful article by Dante Furioso, was also predicated on the conquest of the mosquito. Much of, not most of, SIG architecture in this collection is about state control of bodies from slavery. This is another beautiful article by Edna Von Ohm on medical manuals in the plantation. To slavery, to eugenics, in the beautiful article of Fabiola Lopez Duran in eugenics, particularly in Brazil and modern architecture, or to the control, believe it or not, of menstrual cycles during Fascismo in Nazismo in Germany by Holly Bausmann. Even the planet itself has become both sick and a medical instrument to detect illnesses. Health, this is the article of Clement Filkenstein that studied how in COVID-19 resulted to be one of the quiet seismic times in history, right? So, but of course, health is not just physical. Already in ancient Greece, a variety of mental illnesses were identified and spatialized. Eventually, specialized buildings were offered for isolation and care. The Muslim philosopher Ibn Sina treated the head sick, his work, with calming gardens and fountains in the first mental hospital. So again, architecture and certain forms of architecture, a way to cure mental illness, is already in this moment, in the heart of Baghdad, in the 8th century, his canon of medicine considers psychology to be essential and was the most influential medical test in Europe up to the 17th century. For example, the Hospital of the Innocents was the first psychiatric hospital in the Western world and became the model throughout all of Europe and the Americas, and was founded in Valencia, Spain, where I grew up, in 1410, after observing precisely the Islamic institutions. Eventually, the whole architecture of mental illness was undone, of course, by the anti-psychiatric movement of the 1960s. This is a photo in Basaglia's famous book, Morire di classe, dying of class, I suppose. But experimenting continues today in developing architectures that allows those living on the expanded mental spectrum to be at one shelter and engage in city-like experiments such as this one, Monique and Hyde, was founded in 1972 as a residential care complex for people with mental disabilities in Belgium. But in fact, the question of health, the mental health, and has always been tied to architectural discourse. Architects have always thought about this. For example, at the turn of the century, Camillo Sitte diagnosed the modern city as producing agoraphobia, precisely at the same time that agoraphobia was being identified and discussed in Vienna. No? And in the 40s and 50s, Richard Neuter presented himself as a shrink to his clients, and his architecture was to produce this mental health. Likewise, at the time that in the 60s that stress was identified, you probably know very well about Cobb Himenblau, but you probably don't know, because this was the research of Victoria Way that he did for her dissertation that was amazing, that she discovered that at the time, they don't even talk about it themselves, Cobb Himenblau, but in their early work, in the 60s, they collaborated with psychiatrists to produce prototypes for relaxation architecture. And of course, in reverse, there are mental states such as autism that are now seen as being inherently spatial and implying an architecture, a different architecture altogether. This is beautifully developed in the book by Patrick Jacoco, and Hans Hollein replaced buildings altogether with an architecture pill providing the desired mental state. So, in conclusion, the book is a non-hierarchical, kind of kaleidoscopic almanac with many quirk entries that act as a resource to think more widely and differently about Sikh architecture. In many ways, for us, an invitation to collaborate, to continue to reconsider the ancient and always urgent question of the relationship between health and architecture. Thank you very much. Okay, and now we're going to do the second act.
Yeah, we're going to try to connect the big book to the little book. I especially said it's super nice to be here. It really is a kind of a home. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that without this school, these books would not have appeared. Something would have appeared because we are maniacs. But was affected by this place, or by the capacity of this place, even this room, to sort of nurture ridiculous conversations. And probably know Beatriz and I are totally different I hope you noticed that. But we have one thing for sure in common, which is we're really only interested in whatever it is that other people do not want to talk about. So the assumption is that whatever architectural discourse wants to repress, there's something there, right? And you could say that the AA has a, if you have to compare schools that have gone into the things that are not talked about anywhere else, this is one of those places. So that's why we feel, another way to say it is this is a kind of asylum. And we feel ourselves here as patients.
We've been here so many times. I love this place. I've been talking there, here, everywhere, in different generations and different times. Actually, Alvin Boyarsky was the first one to invite me to the AA, and I was really a kid and I couldn't believe it because I hadn't even published a book or anything. There were a couple of articles around, and one day there's no email or anything, and I received a call from Alvin Boyarsky and invited me to the AA, and I'm like, what? Okay, so I of course came. I was so excited, and it was fantastic. The conference that I gave here was published in an AA, and tragically Alvin died the summer before the publication. So the first thing is the test about, how do you call that? The obit, no?
Obituary.
Obituary of Alvin, and then is my article. I don't remember what AA Files is, but that's the first time that I came. So I was here before I was anybody, and it's amazing to me that there was an Alvin Boyarsky that knew people that didn't exist, really. And how did he know? Because he was always connecting and talking to people all over the place, and somehow this is how it happened.
I suppose it could be annoying to be at a school like this because people keep talking about Alvin in the 70s and constantly the feeling of, and now especially with this sort of Scandinavian redo, there would be this sort of kind of concern that somehow one is not sort of matching the past. But you have to understand how stupid the past was and how clumsy and how at the time nobody knew really what was happening. So these things get in retrospect treated differently. It's very possible that 2025 in London, in this place, will eventually be, in retrospect, reconstructed as sort of significant. I think that's sort of super important that that a school like this is sort of should be, I think, not that you need to hear this from us, like deeply anti-nostalgic, right? If you look back into the 70s, it's easy to be critical what was going on. The most interesting work today doesn't need to think about that, it just needs to be not boring. So your only responsibility is to not be boring. We hope not to bore you with this little book. Beatriz.
Okay, so the book is the companion of this one that you may know, Are We Human, that Mark and I wrote also in connection to an exhibition, the big Istanbul Design Biennale that we did in 2016. And this one was also in connection with an exhibition in the Triennale de Milano with the bacteria, notes towards biotic architecture.
So basically it took us 9 years to answer the question.
Yes.
Think about it.
In a way, it's an answer to the question, are we human? We are bacteria, right? And the exhibition, by the way, is in the Triennale. They have just the Triennale closed, but the exhibition continues because apparently they continue to have public, so they have extended until January in case you happen to be in Milan or want to go to Milan. But basically the point is that looking at bacteria is like looking in the mirror, right? The human is a bag of bacteria, some 39 trillions of bacteria. And many of these bacteria actually have existed for millions of years, where the human, as you know, is a very recent arrival and maybe already on its way out. So this is an important thing. We have to take seriously these bacteria.
Yeah, this is you. This is an E. coli. You have many of these E. coli inside you. By the way, this is not a good one. If you have this one, you will be visiting the plumbing of the AA very shortly. But the theory is this creature, the more you become familiar with this creature, the stranger architecture becomes. Right? So this is you. This is the mirror. To be more precise, this is you. Each of you has 7 meters of tube between your mouth and your anus, each of you. It contains 100 trillion microbes. 39 trillion of those are bacteria, 39 are viruses. Without them, you are not you. They maintain you, they feed you. You actually never touch the world. You only encounter the world through microbes. They gave birth to you, they are your brain, they're everything. If you have a stupid relationship with bacteria, you're stupid, right? Surely a school of architecture is a stupidity reduction machine. Time to get with microbes.
Right. And how did we get into this? I mean, the whole triennale was on the question of inequalities, and we decided to focus on health, and because health is obviously super important in terms of inequalities. And health today, paradigms of health change, as you can see also in my little introduction of the Sikh architecture. We are constantly changing what health means, and today the dominant paradigm is the microbiome, the trillions of microbes that somehow inhabit us, feeds us, maintains us, defends us. And this is very important. Many of the diseases of our time, obesity, diabetes, many forms of cancers, autoimmune disorders, allergies, things that didn't even exist. When I went to school, there was nobody with allergies. Autism, Alzheimer's, all these things are now understood to be a consequence of the diminishing diversity of bacteria in our bodies. So, and this is the interesting, I think we understand that at a health level, everybody's taking probiotics or kombucha or I don't know, but what people don't understand is that architecture is implicated in this reduction of the bacteria. And very important too, that these diseases of the built environment are inseparable from planetary health, right? From the whole kind of biosphere.
So if you're into climate change and you're worried about it, good for you.
But this is going to kill us first.
But this is going to kill us first. And if you're feeling at home with bacteria, maybe some of you are already at a kind of higher Zen level, then you've got to get with viruses. This is typical bacteria being eaten by about 100 viruses. No viruses, no bacteria, no human. You have to get comfortable with viruses. You have to get comfortable with what you fear the most. Of course, I don't know about you, but for me, looking in the mirror and fearing the most the thing that you see yourself, it kind of makes sense, right? So the question is, where is architecture in this extraordinary relationship? We are made of microbes, suspended in a world that's made of microbes. There's some oxygen in this room. It's the excretion of bacteria. So you literally live in, around, and through microbes.
And of course, architecture, particularly Western architecture, but I think all architecture has always been understood in terms of the body. But if you think about this body, it's always this kind of very healthy, very macho body. It's always a man, he's white, he's very exercising, he's of a certain age, right? And so in many ways, from the Renaissance to, let's say, to Le Corbusier, the Modulor, we have this fiction that sustains architecture. At the center of architecture is this very able body. And you think about who is that guy? Because, I mean, even if you happen to be white and beautiful and super healthy and athletic, how long does this last, right? So we are born super fragile, we die fragile, and in the meantime, all kinds of things happen. We have cancer, we go through chemotherapy, we break a leg, we have pregnancy. Okay. So in fact, the point is that architecture is actually a kind of cocoon for this very fragile creature that we call the human, which has to be kept at an internal temperature between 36 and 37 degrees. That is really, really very fragile, sick or becoming sick. And architecture is this protection for this creature. And in many ways, we, the bacteria, tries to think about it differently. Instead of putting this guy at the center, what happens if we put bacteria at the center of the science?
So that's, sorry.
Sorry, because this will mean the center in the human, right? But the thing is that this human center architecture sounds very good, but it has been a complete disaster for the planet and for architecture and for humans. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so good. I mean, human-centric, but it sounds so bad if you think about it. Human-centric. Human-centric could just be a kind of walk towards anthropocenic violence. Think about the fact that since the year 2000, the built environment we currently occupy, not the built environment that we've made, weighs more than the entire biosphere of the planet. It's mainly concrete. So human-centric, not a good thing. What is the human? The opposite of an extremophile, as Beatriz was saying, super, super fragile. So we've thought of architecture as allowing this extremely fragile creature to survive in different environments, even within moderate environments. The reason this book is a little bit of a paradigm shift is the argument that we're making is that architecture has to be almost the opposite. Architecture has to be a way of living with and absorbing and sharing the threats, the other.
Right.
So to protect the human is not to seal the human off from the world, but actually to bring the world in.
Because in fact, we have been phobic about bacteria practically from the moment that bacteria was visualized, right? You think about this monster soup. You probably are familiar with this image, commonly called Thames water, right? It's a 19th century woman that drops in horror her teacup when she discovered through a magnifying glass all these creatures that are in the Thames, which she thinks are the cause of disease. And this is the interesting thing. The popular belief that these creatures were causing disease precedes the doctors understanding that this causes disease. So doctors were denying that disease was caused for bacteria, but people, as you can see at a popular level, were horrified that this was giving them cholera and typhoid fever and all of this. It's always interesting to me that the medical community is always behind in some ways. It's kind of like right now it's the same in many ways. We have always this suspicion. Do they know? They don't know really anything.
But just to lower the tone, right? So the shit from this building, I think the oldest school, the oldest architecture school, right? The shit from this building would make its way to the Thames, and the water, the fresh water for this building was coming from the Thames. The place where the shit was going into the Thames and the place where the water was coming back was the same. So in 1828, there's the beginning of an argument that this is not good and that this is causing cholera. And as Beatriz says, not even just doctors, the leading scientists, the experts in bacteria said, no way cholera is produced by bacteria. Even in 1855, when John Snow famously demonstrated that it was, science still rejected the argument.
Still, we're rejecting in the face of this incredible study of John Snow that demonstrated that actually the cholera epidemic has been caused from a contaminated fountain in Soho. They still the whole medical establishment. No, but they couldn't. It was not caused by.
I never thought about it before, but today's the reverse, right? So today, now we have difficulty to try to understand how healthy bacteria is. Right?
And that's what we have to insist, I suppose. Anyway, to make the story short, it was Louis Pasteur, of course, and Koch that first demonstrated the link between specific bacteria and diseases like anthrax, tuberculosis, cholera, etc. In the late 1870s and 80s, and launched this kind of media campaign against this invisible organism. Here you have Pasteur and then Koch, and this is the exhibition in London and in Berlin and all over the place, where Koch exhibited precisely these first photographs of the pathogens. And so the public could look through microscope in the health exhibition and see these bacteria that most likely they were already in their stomach, right, in their intestine. Because even if you don't have cholera, you have cholera. Except that you have enough good balance of good bacteria and bad bacteria, you don't get sick. So they probably were looking at themselves, as you say, in a mirror.
For sure. Right? So each of you has inside you most pathogens. They're not really bothering you because you have a very vibrant, multidimensional, biodiverse community of microbes that renders those pathogens not pathogens. Actually, a pathogen is only a bacteria that starts to cause disease when it's in a kind of majority.
Right.
So you have this inside you. By the way, each of you is releasing about 80 million per hour through every orifice you have. Each of you is breathing in the microbes of the others. Architecture is the way we share microbes.
Yes, we are all sharing microbes right now. Which is
feel good. And that's what a school is, right? You share. So there's a lot of sharing going on. So you're also passing pathogens to each other. Those of you who are very stressed or very ill or very sensitive or have difficulty with the environment could easily be affected by a microbe that is for one of your dear colleagues not a problem at all.
Right.
So it's a political question. It's immediately political. It's not metaphorically political. The question of bacteria is the question of politics, how to live with the other.
Right. You can see from the illustrations in these books that the Exilium was promoting a series of protocols for the design of the house and the city, including all the new plumbing equipment, the water closets, etc. So there's architecture from the beginning. And very soon, houses start to look like sanitized laboratories. For example, this is Leopold Bauer in his Villa Kurz in Vienna of, what is it, 1902.
1902, yeah. It's amazing. And this is his teacher, Otto Wagner, who argued that every hotel room should be the same as a hospital room. So there's this confusion of the hospital, the hotel, and the house. They all become the same thing. The funny thing was, and he was obsessed with the bacteria. In the same year, 1902, he complained of the cultures of bacteria of Vienna versus other cities. He himself, by the way, died of a bacterial infection in his own very clean house. He was such an anti-Semite, it's hard to feel too sad about it, and you feel a little bit like the bacteria did the right thing with him. But how obsessive! It's really, and maybe this is what Beatriz and I are trying to say. See, at that moment, 1902, bacteria was a word that an architectural theorist would use. Otto Wagner is writing the first book with the name Modern Architecture. The first manifesto for modern architecture talks about bacteria. We are not, as it were, bringing a subject that architects haven't thought about. We're bringing the subject that architecture, as we know it, modern architecture, was formed on the basis of.
Yes.
It's a little bit like this collective amnesia you were talking about.
Yeah.
How do we forget?
No, but it's not collective amnesia. It's collective blindness of us as historians as well, because I couldn't understand when I was writing X-ray architecture how nobody else has written this book before, how modern architecture has been written about in every possible way, including by myself, not just from the point of view of aesthetics and this and that, or at a certain point we brought the question of gender and this, and I don't know, from every single point of view. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, but it's obvious. I mean, they are all talking about tuberculosis. The illustrations are about tuberculosis. They are putting images of taken from medical books. They are obsessed with this, all of them. Why are we not talking about it? It's like it's there, but we are not. This is like it's not. We are not seeing it. So that was striking. Anyway, Fleming in 1928 was the first discovered, of course, the first modern antibiotic, penicillin, by accident, which demonstrated that that mold stopped the growth of certain bacteria. But in fact, what is interesting about Fleming is that it's a rediscovery, not a discovery, because already Imhotep, who, by the way, is a doctor and an architect, the famous architect of the pyramids of Saqqara, the step pyramids of Saqqara, already demonstrated in the 2600 BC that he knew already that applying moldy bread.
Moldy
bread. You see, you have to correct the English. Moldy bread to skin infections.
So 5,000 years ago.
5,000 years ago, he already knew. So way before Fleming, he already, and this is a knowledge that was known at a popular level in one of the biologists that Mark and I are working with, grew up in a kind of impoverished part of Spain, and she remembers that when she was a kid and she fell in the streets or whatever, and she had a kind of wound and got infected, that her grandmother would put moldy bread on top of the infection. So, the popular level was there, but we acted like Fleming discovered this when in fact it was already in many ways there. And of course, plants and fungi with antibacterial properties have been always central to the ancient and ongoing practices of many indigenous communities all over the world, which now finally they are being taken very seriously in the age as alternatives to antibiotics, in the age of antimicrobial resistance in hospitals, all these bugs in hospitals that kill you. So this is going to be the main cause of death very soon, according to the World Health Organization. These bacteria resistant to antibiotics, and that's why there is now all this contemporary research on all these natural ways of going about antibacterial.
So if you're an architect and you have this kind relationship to humans, think about it, right? Antimicrobial resistance will be the main killer of humans starting in about 5 years.
Yeah.
So time to get serious.
Right.
And think of the history of this. This image now, this is 1904, so it's very similar time to the Otto Wagner and Leopold Bauer. But now we're not reading an architectural magazine. These are two feminist microbiologists in the United States publishing women's education manuals explaining that what they should do is have a petri dish and put it in a room after they've cleaned it just to see how successful their cleaning is. And this was published in Ladies' Home Journal at the same time as in one of the most influential kind of home education courses. So here you have the architects speaking at one level to their community, and you have scientists speaking to primarily women at another level about a kind of revolution in what is the house, what is the bacteria, what does it mean to be at home.
Yeah, at first I thought, oh yeah, now we have to do one more thing. So it's not enough that you have your house clean, but you have to demonstrate that your house is free of bacteria too, and put petri dishes in your living room and in your bedrooms. And then I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe the woman has been all of a sudden kind of upgraded. All of a sudden she's a bacteriologist and her house is her laboratory. So there's always a positive. Modern architecture, as we were saying before, channeled this antibiotic approach. Le Corbusier was completely obsessed with bacteria. He quoted counts of bacteria per cubic meter in the air. He described himself as a bacteriologist and architecture and city planning as a laboratory work in precisions. For example, this important book that you know, he writes, we need a diagnosis and a line of conduct. In 1922, I tried to delve into an analysis. I did some laboratory work isolating my microbe. I watched it develop. The biology of my microbe appear in indisputable clarity, 32 square diagnosis. Then by an effort of synthesis, I drew up the fundamental principles of modern city planning. So city planning starts from the bacteria already in the Corbusier. So it's fascinating also that this is in a very famous book, and everybody passes through this passage and says, oh, he's saying something weird. He's always saying something weird, right? So why are you not paying attention to this weird one, right? So it's super interesting that modern architecture is really modern only as long as it's free of bacteria. Here you have, for example, the famous poster of the Weissenhof Siedelung in Stuttgart of 1927. Normally in a poster you normally do what you are going to do, for example, the building of Le Corbusier next door. But what is interesting is that this poster is what you're not going to do, and what is crossed out is precisely this 19th century interior that could be one of those described by Walter Benjamin, full of knickknacks and draperies and carpets and all these things that accumulate dust, because it was believed, and it's correct, that the tuberculosis bacillus hides in the dust. I thought for a long time this is kind of a weird belief, but then it turns out that scientifically it's correct, that you have tuberculosis and you spit, and this sputum is now dry and becomes air. 15 days after, it's still contagious. So they were onto something with this idea of cleaning the dust.
And just think about it. All these walls are white. Mm-hmm. You all brushed your teeth. Probably you're using toilet paper. If you can afford it, deodorant. You're experts at killing bacteria. Mm. You're in a room that prides itself, like most rooms. This air is filtered in certain ways, right? In every way, you're sitting inside a modern room, living a modern life, which is antibacterial. You have a genocidal relationship to microbes, right? So pay attention, we're saying, to the history of this, right? So this is the Le Corbusier system for exact air, how to make sure your air never comes into contact with the microbes of outside. And he's an amateur compared to Bucky Fuller, who's a total germaphobe that didn't like to sit on the same toilet as his beloved wife, right? In case he would receive, he after doing the design of this house in 1927, which is nothing other than an antibacterial machine, he devoted himself for 3 years to devise the perfect toilet as the chief engineer for the main sanitary engineering company of the United States. He worked for the toilet company, right? Much more important than architecture. And he argued that basically architecture is an extension of the toilet, right? And sanitary and sane are the same thing. Clean mind, clean body, clean architecture, clean world. So, this is the architecture. There is not like this and then Bucky Fuller's architecture. Architecture is a space made by the killing of microbes.
Right, but this antibacterial architecture produces sicknesses, as we were saying before. Is this incredible? Because this sick building syndrome is still kind of questioned, right? And we just discovered this recently, this article in Finland where people have, like in many places in the world, they have symptoms of the sick building syndrome, but they are not believed. So this is a doctor, for example, one of the few doctors in Finland who is willing to give patient the diagnosis of the sick syndrome building. So they are fearful of people that suffer those symptoms. They are fearful of saying it because they think they have a mental problem, right? When in fact it's demonstrated to be, but this goes back historically.
Yeah. So what's the difference between this image and this room, right? This image is 10,000 years ago. This is in what would be present-day Jordan. One of the first, it's in a very interesting site that has a 2,000-year history. This is from the middle of that history. It's the moment of permanent settlement. It's just before agriculture. It's a house made of plaster, the first synthetic material. You can see it's a prophylactically sealed environment. This is the moment that the human is separating itself from the soil. The soil is where all the microbes are that formed us. We as a species grew in the soil like any other plant. Architecture is the beginning of a separation from the soil in which we were born. This room is a further statement, a continuation of that history. This white is receiving an inheritance going back to the white plaster of the first house. It's meant to represent kind of cleanliness and so on. And the very first thing that happened when we went into that side space is we became shorter. The human species became significantly shorter because it was really unhealthy.
Yeah, and our lives were also shorter. It's very, very interesting. And also recent excavations of the Neolithic has demonstrated that doctor that I mentioned before, the Dr. Ward Richardson, that have said that in constructing architecture, we created the conditions for disease was correct. Because in this excavation, they have demonstrated that diseases that existed, but they were never pandemics, they were never a problem. I mean, they were a problem for a person here, another there, but they became epidemic. So this is a skeleton that demonstrates that has been affected by tuberculosis of the bone, right? So the moment we went indoors, diseases of tuberculosis emerged. They didn't exist before. I'm going to jump into one that is absolutely fascinating to me, which is polio. Polio, which didn't exist before, because you can see this tablet of the Egypt in, I don't know what year it is, but many, many years ago, already saw some sign of polio, but it was never an epidemic. It became an epidemic precisely the moment that we became too clean. Right? And it became an epidemic of rich countries and clean countries. So where are the worst epidemics of polio? At the beginning of the 20th century and in the middle of the 20th century, Sweden and the United States, Northern European countries and the United States, rich countries, clean countries. This is fascinating because even inside the United States, African American communities, for example, were affected much less than middle class communities. Why is that? Why is it that through sanitation, diseases that are transmitted through fecal matter, like cholera or typhoid fever, were greatly improved? I mean, less people had it. And polio exploded. Precisely because the antibody of the polio was transmitted through the maternal milk when kids were still exposed to the ground. But the moment we went indoors, then kids were exposed to this virus much later when they didn't have any more maternal immunity. And that's why it was always between 5 and 6 around that time that people were, that kids were most affected by polio. When the first vaccine was emerged, then polio became a vaccine of the disease of the unvaccinated. Why? Again, because the protocol of the first vaccine of polio required multiple shots, and you have to go to you have to be middle class, you have to be organized, you have to have a house. So all of a sudden, again, the poor fell through, and what had been not a problem before became a problem. So it became a disease of poor countries and first of poor people, of the unvaccinated, right, and of poor countries unvaccinated again, because the polio vaccine didn't arrive immediately.
So just to kind of clarify, right, each of you has a microbial community. It's very particular, a combination of species, maybe 700 species of of bacteria, for example. That combination of species that you have is more unique than your fingerprint. It is the most unique thing about you. It is the majority of your genetic material. You build your microbiome between the ages of 0 and 3. Once you get to 3 years old, it's fixed. So if you don't get sick during and those of you with kids know, if the kids don't get sick between 0 and 3, they become very unhealthy ever since then. This example of polio is an example of that. If you don't make the encounter with the virus early enough, you will get very ill. If you don't have peanuts when you're tiny, you'll get a peanut allergy and so on.
Yeah.
You could argue that architecture schools would be more rationally devoting themselves only to the life of humans between the ages of 0 and 3. And everything else would be fine, right? And then if you think about that, if we're into the ethics of our field, that would be our concentration. And if we did that, we took care of kids between 0 and 3, in so many ways, architecture would be more interesting. It would be for sure more biodiverse, would be more fluid, more resilient, more interesting, more playful, so many things, right?
Right. In terms of inequalities, that was the point when we were working with the Triennale, where we have a contradiction, right? Because we were always making the case of health, and health outcomes are always related to inequalities. And here we had a case in which you couldn't make the case. It's almost the opposite, right? It was the middle class that was most affected. It was rich countries that was more affected. It was like the exception that confirmed the rule, right? Anyway, going back to this.
We could go on and on. I hope it's clear.
Right. We are now working with a group of biologists on these questions, and we have written articles in scientific journals like the PNAS, which is a kind of very important, what is it called? Proceedings of the National
Academy of Sciences.
On the microbiome of buildings, because this is the thing, buildings have microbiomes. This building has a microbiome. We think a lot about the microbiome of the human. And among these is Maria Gloria Dominguez Bello, who is a professor at Rutgers University, and she cracked a problem that it was kind of puzzling to the medical community. Why babies born out of cesarean section had sometimes incomprehensible medical problems even a year after they are born. And she demonstrated that a year after they are born, a baby born out of cesarean has microbes that were in in the room in which they were born, in the supposedly sterile building or room in which the C-section took place. So, of course, no surprised that there will be some, if there was a bad bug there, and you could have incomprehensible medical situations, and they are trying to counter this by wiping because the kids didn't pass to the very beneficial vaginal fluid with a lot of very rich bacteria that protects you for the first year of life. So they are trying to counter it by wiping the fluids of the vagina into the newborn, but it's helping, but it's not helping completely. You know why? Because we have lost so much bacteria. We have now half of the diversity of bacteria that are ancestors, right? And this is a major problem, as we were saying before, health-wise. And this is the incredible thing. The richest microbiome in the planet is in indigenous communities in the Amazon, for example, in several places in Africa. And these scientists are collecting seed, basically, in many parts of the world, and have established a bank of bacteria in Switzerland, very much inspired by the seed bank in wherever it is. I don't remember now. Norway, but the city. No, but anyway.
So I suppose we get almost
all this bank for all these bacteria that we are losing, and some of which we don't even know what their function is.
So to summarize, there are two huge health crises that are urgent. One is this decline in the microbiodiversity in your gut, which is a real killer, because it's this diversity that gives you individually and as a species gives us resilience. And the second is the rise of antimicrobial resistance, so the exact opposite. And what we argue is that architecture is the criminal actor in both cases. Architecture has massively contributed to the decline in microbiodiversity and in the increase in antimicrobial resistance. And those two things together is is super lethal.
So biotic architecture, what will that be? It will be more like our guts, no? More like encouraging a kind of a community of good and bad bacteria. And we did this experiment. We're going to go very quickly through some of these ideas in the exhibition in Milan. Starting with this big circle.
So if you unfold your guts, each of us, it's 32 square meters. So each of us is bigger than this room. It's not like little human in big room. It's actually big humans in little room. So of course, the surface of your gut, which is covered with mucus, is in intimate contact with the surfaces of this building. No matter this room looks like it was recently redone, there are still the microbes of the 70s here, lurking. Cedric Price is somewhere in there, because it doesn't, you literally live in the history of microbes. All the materials are full of microbes, metals, stone, wood. It's mainly plastic, right? Or we cover ourselves with this prophylactic plastic, but plastic is perfect, good place for microbes.
Okay, so we have this circle, which is the unfolded intestine, and this little carpet, which represents the typical square meter. So
20 square meters is the average human
square
living
meter living space in the planet. We deconstructed the building to demonstrate the ways in which architecture is all about isolating us from the microbes. You want to talk about the...
Imagine you do a core sample right through the whole biosphere, from deep into the earth into outer space, and just see only microbes. You would see that the whole world of microbes is concentrated in the top 10 centimeters of soil, whereas 25% of the world's microbes. Only 5% above that, but they go as far as outer space.
Right. We have managed to send bacteria into outer space. You know that the space station may be soon inhabitable to humans, because there are now these bugs there. We have sent bacteria that had become unmanageable.
And the kind of scandalous idea that life came from outer space, which is a 19th century idea, is now the dominant theory, that life was incubated on Earth by bacteria arriving from outer space.
Yeah.
So bacteria are astronauts, just when you thought they're already doing too much.
Right. And we have a timeline in this long wall of the exhibition, where you can see all the extinctions that we have. If we think that now we have big extinctions, they were at the moment that oxygen arrived, that made plants possible, that make animals possible, that make us possible. 95% of all species that existed in the planet at the time disappear. So we have gone through a lot of extinctions.
So it's a timeline that goes 4.5 billion years, and humans arrive very late in that, and architecture arrives even later, and both of them seem to be about to go.
And this is the typical arsenal in an Italian house to deal with bacteria. And all these antibacterial products, antibacterial this, antibacterial, all the cleaning products, particularly in Milan, they are very...
By the way, you want to make a superbug? It's super easy. You just really try to clean as much as you can. And then the only thing that lives is a microbe that loves to eat what you use to kill all the other microbes.
Right.
So the most dangerous room you can ever occupy is an operating room.
Right. And here you have all the extinctions, the plague pay, tuberculosis, etc. That you can see there is also a whole history of the 10,000 years on the tables, the 10,000 years of architecture from the point of view of bacteria. Liz Diller did a beautiful film, which is the protocols that the Triennale uses to clean. And they employ, of course, some dancers to enact this cleaning.
You think cleaning is not erotic? Not psychopathological? Come on. This is Laura Kurgan rendering, this is the most accurate portrait of the genetic of our species. And we just go fast.
Yeah, those are some of the precedents, the people that we find inspiration. For example, is Lina Bobardi, who when he designed her Casa de Vidro in Brazil. She drew every little creature that was living on the side, all the insects, all the little animals. You see in this space how, in fact, she considers the site and all these creatures that are living there as very much a point of departure. Right? Normally, architects design the site, draw the site, and if you're lucky, they put a tree or two. They take account of something like that. She takes account of every living creature, and we are supposed to let them live.
So Cedric said he didn't know what the question was, but he knew that technology was the answer. We don't know what the question is, but Lina Barbati is for sure the answer.
No, bacteria is the answer. The whatever, more manifesto.
Yeah, Hunterwasser, 1958. Matt Clark begins his work making microbes, making a mess.
So it's not like we are the first ones to think about bacteria. This is Alan Sonfist, an artist of the 70s, Martin Margiela, people in fashion also. Okay.
Bacteria are like ruling the construction, maintenance, and preservation of buildings.
Right.
Probably you know this, but it's extraordinarily interesting. We just try to show that.
In these cylinders, you see all the different ways in which bacteria is used to clean. We have a piece, for example, here on the right, an actual piece from the Duomo of Milano. The people doing the restoration lent us this piece because they use bacteria to clean it. The Alhambra gave us a piece. I mean, it was unbelievable. We collected all these things from all over the world in which bacteria is used for preservation, for conservation, for cleaning, for...
Yeah, if you don't disinfect a hospital but spray bacteria once every 2 days, patients get better twice as quick. They have less. They need less antibiotics. The hospital generates less pathogens. Any hospital that doesn't spray itself with bacteria rather than disinfect is actually killing you. Almost no hospitals do. Right. So
during COVID, there were these women that were
in Italy.
Doctors in Italy that made this experiment of spraying the walls of the hospital with good bacteria instead of cleaning manually like they do normally. And in these hospitals where they did this experiment, people recovered faster. There were less time in the hospital. They didn't develop secondary infections, particularly this bacteria resistant to antibiotics. So those are things to consider. Well, the second section aim at the future, and it's a series of 10 international. This is Philip Brown, for example, that working with microbiologists presented different views of how we could do it. So this is
because we don't know what the future. The future is by definition. Yeah, the future is by definition a shock. It's not what you expect, right? So we invite 10 studios to think about it. This is Philip Brown saying basically, climate change moves at 1 meter per hour. So during the time you've been with us, temperature moved globally 1 meter. Plants can't move that fast. So basically temperature and soil are moving at one speed, plants at another, animals at another. So he speculated that young kids in Italy actually need the soil of the south of Italy.
So this is the soil of Syracuse, I think.
Yeah.
Syracuse, and this playground to indicate that the kids in Milano now should be playing with the soil of the south of Italy.
Between the years of 0 and 3. So if you're like the best parent ever, and you're giving the parent everything, which in this case means making sure that child eats dog shit. Guillermo, you are this parent. You have to also give them the shit of further south.
Okay, and right. Here we have a view of some of these experiments. It's really like a lab, the second part of the exhibition.
This is Lydia Calipoliti. These are amazing people, you know, Rachel Armstrong, Andres Hacker.
An ecological studio, and a number of others that are working with bacteria, right?
People much more interesting than us. And
okay, so
that was it. But we now join with Nick and Guillermo and Sylvia to talk with you about what this might mean. Anyway, thanks for putting up with us.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I never in a million years would have imagined that a conversation that's essentially about all kinds of potential disease and death could be that incredibly amusing and funny. So first off, thank you for achieving that, because I think that really had the potential to have a very different tone than what it actually did. So you pulled that off beautifully. I might start perhaps by asking Nick and Guillermo to introduce themselves. so the audience knows everyone at the table.
My name is Nick. I am deputy editor at Eflux Architecture, which means I've been lucky enough to work with Beatriz and her academic community on developing the SICK Architecture project for the past 5 years now. And I was also invited by both Mark and Beatriz to work with them on the We the Bacteria book as an editor.
Yeah.
And I'm Guillermo. I teach here at the AA History and Theory Studies and the HCT Master as well. And I'm working with Beatriz in my dissertation at Princeton, a PhD dissertation. And I've been lucky enough as well to work in SICK Architecture book from the PhD series until the book and through the exhibition as well in SIVA and everything. And also I was the curatorial assistant for We the Bacteria in Milan. So it's been an intense and great collaboration throughout all this process.
It's funny that we are all in both books. I mean, Mark is in the SICK Architecture because he contributed an essay. Nick is in the We the Bacteria, of course, in SICK Architecture, and Guillermo is both in SICK Architecture. Yeah.
Incest.
Incest, yes.
Incest, or you're very much, I think, practicing what you're preaching. I think one of the underlying themes in all of the work is, after centuries of an architecture of singularity that tried first and foremost to exclude in one form or another, it seems as if what you're calling us to do is profoundly radical, in that you're asking us to kind of open up what has been, at least, since architecture, Renaissance architecture with a capital A, something that excluded more often than not.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think this is beautifully put. I think it's in that sense that we were talking about the fact that it's always political. So it's almost like the anti-Trump, in the sense it's never about excluding the other, but about bringing the other in, right? And creating this community of different bacteria in this case. But it's not very different from what is happening also at other levels, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it could be understood, or the pretentious level of it is, I think, and it's all pretentious. But why not, right? Like, why not try to take it on? Is to redefine the concept of shelter. Exactly. Which is not so simple, because if you said it very well, but if we bring the other in, okay, well, that E. coli I mentioned before, if that's on your salad, you die, right? So it's not bringing everything in, but thinking about what it means to curate a kind of healthy, biodiverse community. It's not that cleaning is a bad idea or we should stop brushing our teeth and so on. But by the way, historically, we didn't used to need to brush our teeth. So the particular bacterial community that is occupying our teeth is itself a symptom of architecture, but it's another.
Yeah,
but maybe
it's super interesting. This is a recent discovery. They cannot find cavities in any excavation. So why is it that these people that didn't brush their teeth didn't have any problem, right? So it's a disease of our times, all these teeth problems.
But how would Nick? And Guillermo, you also. I was thinking, Guillermo, of your amazing study of Ellis Island and so on. This is the very kind of, that's at the political level, a nation defining itself by excluding. Supposedly excluding disease, right?
I think the first thing that the book does and all this work does is shedding light on this aspect that has been excluded from history, at the same time that has been focused on something else, which is like human-centered history. And by putting into conversation things that by disciplinary means were explicitly not connected, like architecture and medicine as two disciplines that have been separated, by connecting both as they're actually very tight together, they could actually have been the same discipline, then you start thinking of new possibilities, or be it then once you're aware of that. So I think that's one of the main, specifically in the case of Ellis Island, was like, well, architecture had actually a fundamental role in defining in linking migration and disease. Without architecture, that tight link wouldn't have been possible in the turn of the century in the United States, right? Because there was a way in which migrants were categorized, was processed, that without a spatial distribution wouldn't be simply able to communicate that to the general public. We're starting to understand that, then you can start to unravel that in a more provocative or like propositive way.
But wasn't it also like an excuse, right? I mean, because you mentioned very beautifully how people that were flying, arriving in first-class cabins, they will be visited by a doctor cursorily in their cabins, and they never pass by Ellis Island. But poor people are the ones that are passed by the whole process of the Ellis Island, and how architecture is involved, that big staircase where people are observing, and you don't know that you are being observed to see whether there is any kind of disability. So architecture is involved in the process of understanding who or determining who is able and disabled, and who is going to come in and who is not. So it's a class.
Yeah, and I think you should read the article. No. But
available in the bookstore.
As Beatriz was saying, I think part of the role of architecture is not only linking disease and migration at the kind of material level, but also broadcasting the idea of disease. Disease, and so in that sense, first-class migrants were never checked at Ellis Island. But that didn't matter, because what mattered was that the New York Times was describing Ellis Island as the perfect immigration station that would make sure that only healthy workers come into the United States. So in that sense, architecture is not only like in a more kind of almost just Foucauldian sense, just dividing and classifying bodies, but it's also like a screen in both ways, screening bodies, but also broadcasting this idea further. And without architecture, again, that image wouldn't have been able to be projected outside. So architecture plays that idea of trust. I was actually thinking when you were talking before, the idea of transmission throughout the book, and how transmission actually seems to me that these books and the exhibition together, they redefine transmission beyond borrowing from epidemiological terms, right? Because there is architecture, built environment, there is a bacteriological and biological transmission. I'm also thinking about the chronic whiteness, but there is also the idea of aesthetics that it transmitted, the ideological. So in a way, thinking about architecture and transmission in this way unravels other entanglements and thinks transmission in a very different way, just like as epidemic, right? And Ellis Island might be the same, which is there's the broadcast, the transmission of that ideology at the same time as other transmissions happening.
I wonder if we could maybe bring it back to COVID and the moment where actually, a seminar which you were developed coincided with the fact that a pandemic had just exploded. And all of a sudden, I wonder if there's the possibility to talk about, number one, how the pandemic affected a subject which clearly had been very interesting for you for a long time, but then also actually how the emergence of this topic, which maybe was much smaller, suddenly helped people through influx begin to think about COVID or architecture in potentially a different way, how it perhaps might have helped actually people to experience COVID in a less isolated way.
Yes, definitely for the group that was part of the class. I mean, I think it was interesting, no, to look at it in this way, and the ways in which we have discussed how our diseases always affect the city and how the diseases always affect architecture, and we were seeing it unfolding in front of our eyes from the moment, for example, that the New York started to open up, and something that in New York is completely alien, or was completely alien until then, which is the terraces outside. They started to emerge everywhere. All this, everybody became an expert in architecture. Everybody was measuring the 2 meters distance. Everybody became an expert in dimension.
I remember after that, then we were in Princeton and people were like, Beatriz, be careful with your next PhD seminar, because whatever you said in the brief seems to happen catastrophically. Just be careful what you
unleash.
Yes, exactly.
Right, exactly. Now is the bacteria.
But I was in a way, I'm echoing your question because in a way it's a question for Nick because I'm wondering, because efflux is a transmission system, right? And at that moment, you were infecting houses with alternative ideas about disease, right? I mean, and it seems to me the ambition of efflux is to be some kind of contamination system to start with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this, when we started publishing this, which I think was in September of 2020.
Yeah.
So we were about 9 months in, and I think not everyone was, I mean, there was still a lot of panic and uncertainty, right? But I think even, that moment,
Yeah, for some one. I can't tell which one. It's probably that one.
It gave a bit of kind of perspective, which is not necessarily relief, but it also, as you said, Beatrice, like there have been many more kind of more severe and more drastic, more deadly pandemics. But at the same time, I don't know. I think that there's something that we do at Efflux. I mean, this was a very significant and a very large project, but I feel like there's, we take almost, I don't want to say a scatterbrain approach, but because, every week we're publishing, something about sickness, and then another week it's something about, like landscapes as media infrastructures. It's like we're almost trying to make sure that like our intellectual microbiome is as diverse as possible, right? That we don't get like so kind of overly obsessive about one specific way of seeing architecture and seeing discourse, but that we start to understand, the kind of inherent contradictions and paradoxes and differences that exist within different kind of discursive communities around the world.
I think that's such a beautiful way of describing it, and calling it scatterbrained, which might depends, on the kind of school of thought that you belong to, but it could seem as a derogatory term. But actually, you are actually practicing the method of an architecture of bacteria when you're scatterbrained, because you allow possibly exactly like you're saying, in the kind of healthy intellectual microbiome, effectively. And it is, again, I kind of don't want to labor the point too much, but at one point you spoke about the modular man, and you were wondering like, why is this guy here? Even if you happen to be him, you're only ever going to be him for like max 15, 20 years. And then that's not going to be the case anymore. And you also talked about how, in a sense, modern architecture is the architecture of bacteria. It's a foundational key in the evolution of everything. But the shift that you're asking us to do, I would say, which is such a fundamental call to action, is you're asking us to shift from a singular image of the man, the subject, the pure idea, into the scatterbrain, the everything that brings complexity together. And then you might accidentally invite in E. coli.
Yeah.
And that's a really precarious, dangerous, and exciting place to be.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for architects going forward to enter a world of potentially E. coli, but also healthy gut bacteria?
Well, I mean, the trick is to not be stupid, right? I mean, so the question is, what would be not stupid in our field? And what's really, really stupid is that architecture is, however you define it, monocultural. To an astounding extent, the species, make buildings more or less the same way with the same materials everywhere on the planet, regardless of the situation. The way we do it is stupid, but even more stupid is the fact that we do it all the same way. I mean, this is why Beatrice and I treasure this room, because there are places that work against this synchronization, right? And maybe Efflux is also working against synchronization, not having any particular vision of the future, but just trying to kind of stir the pot to see if some alternatives can emerge. So if people ask us now more and more, like, well, what do you think biotic architecture should be? And we're always like, well, what do you think? Like, whatever it is, it should be not the way it is now, and it should not be any one thing, right? So I loved your expression scatterbrain. Like imagine a brain that has been scattered. I mean, not like an assassination movie or something, but not unlike that. Wouldn't be so bad to assassinate architecture as a discipline, as a sort of a steady synchronizing, because not only are we synchronized, we imagine that architecture somehow synchronizes people, that people living in certain spaces will behave certain ways. So I was really touched by Guillermo's argument of the reverse side, to what extent architecture is transmitting certain ideas about health. And the white surface is a particularly interesting example because, of course, plaster was antimicrobial. They didn't have the theory of microbes, but they could smell that a house that is replastered twice a year smelled better. Eventually it got substituted with non-antimicrobial paint, which continues to, in Guillermo's words, transmit the idea of cleanliness. And the fact that, and of course this whiteness coincides with other horrific, systemic systems of inequality. So it's also weird that a monoculture is also unequal, right? It's just I know it's a kind of an obvious paradox, but as long as every building is always made the same way, actually it relates directly to the fact that humans are treated very, very differently, right? Something like that.
One quick question. I don't know if this is, about time. I mean, Ellis Island, this idea of pause, the idea of infection, the idea of immediate and deferred transmission, because all of this has also this, the idea of separation from one condition to another, and the scatterbrain motif infers a level of kind of constant intersection, constant state of chaos that is operating at a similar scale. And I'm just wondering if this benefit of that pause, architectures that are designed explicitly to quarantine, to understand or to determine the length or duration of contamination, I find super interesting, but also in relation to the way in which we transmit information to one another or kind of confront this ideas I've heard all day of parity.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that there's something to this, like maybe not to sick architecture, but to We the Bacteria that is also like very not scatterbrained. Like it is also like a deeply, deeply serious like call for action or a manifesto. And I don't know. I mean, it's not necessarily. It's not necessarily responding directly to this question of pause, but I do think it's worth kind of reflecting deeply on this, and there have been, I would say, some other architects or other people working in the extended sphere of architecture and the building industry who have taken these lessons very, very seriously in the past. And I don't mean Lena, I don't mean those people. I mean people who design, cladding or design building systems. And what has happened in the past, when people have taken this call very seriously, is they made incredibly boring spaces, right? Using your term here.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I really hope that what will happen when we take this seriously. We can create something that is not quite so boring.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to involve shit. I mean, and that's almost by definition that which should not be talked about, right? So it really means, it's kind of hard to be boring about shit, it seems to me. There was the great project that Lydia Kalapalidi writes about, a student of the AA whose project was to basically live inside his own shit, right? That amazing house.
Oh, yes, her dissertation talked about this thesis that was done here in the 70s. I don't remember now. The architect built a model house here in London as part of the thesis of the AA. And it was about recycling his own, excrement, urine, everything. It's amazing. I mean, there were so many experiments here in the 60s and 70s that are extraordinary in that sense. So in many ways, we are returning to something that has happened in other moments in history. Yeah.
I wanted to say something about timing because it's something that working with Beatriz and Mark in the With the Bacteria actually. And Beatriz mentioned it, but I want to repeat it because it really changed the way I thought about this, which is like architecture, health crisis kind of set a moment of pause, a moment of quarantine, a moment of reinvention that then gets inscribed into normality through history. So there's something cyclical, but at the same time, not quite at the same pace, which happens. And when we were working on those tables in the Triennale, it's really, you could see how certain issues like the Neolithic and the whitewashing, or the plague in medieval times, so cholera in London in the 19th century, actually get normalized. And there are a lot of Victorian rules on, especially like British toilets, that still applied nowadays. And that's, and not only that, right? But the idea of the toilet comes from that. The water closet comes from then. There were no toilets, and there were, how were they called? The night soil men that actually just collect the excrements, and because there was so many of those ideas, because there is a health crisis, there's a moment of pause, a moment of quarantine where architecture gets reshaped or the city gets reshaped, but then it's just carried all the way, right? So I think that kind of temporality was actually quite really interesting in working on that project of cyclical, but at the same time moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That this question that Ingrid raised of the hesitation of the pause, because even built into the idea of healthy versus sick, right? This idea that one is normally healthy and then occasionally sick implies that sickness is a time of pause from everyday life. But part of the claim being made here is that everyday life is shaped by previous pauses. So I don't think anything happened during COVID. All right, it was a little tiny echo of all the echoes that go back to kind of 14th century Italian peninsula, the first immune response from architecture and cities to epidemic disease was the invention of quarantine, social distancing, all the rules of COVID, even the 2 meters. There was a stick you had to walk around with to make that difference. The white, the cleaning, all of this, and then it gets repeated, and as Beatriz beautifully points out, between every flush of disease, there is amnesia. So there is this kind of rhythm, and which is primarily mostly forgetting. And I think the microbial paradigm undoes a kind of simple opposition between being healthy and being sick, because your child should be sick in order to be healthy. So immunity itself, there was an old idea of the immune system, which is that it keeps the bad things out. The current idea of the immune system is that it's a curator. And so I think this is a very, very interesting and quite optimistic image for architecture. What would it be for architecture to be a form of curating, kind of fellowship with things that annoy us or frustrate us or whatever? And I don't know. What does that curation mean? We don't know. I mean, but if we had a pause, not so bad. Not so bad.
I know you have the idea, but then maybe we can open it to questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will open it to the audience.
Yep.
There you go. Yeah.
We'll start here.
Okay.
No, I mean, thanks so much. Amazing work, really fascinating work. And I'm wondering, I mean, one thing that this provoked for me is a question about the boundaries of the discipline, in a sense, because how much, when we talk about architecture, do we refer to what would traditionally sit within a disciplinary boundary, and how much are we talking about perhaps infrastructure, technology, and their role in the way that they shape the possibility for quarantine, for example, with COVID. So, Zoom, meeting, social media, technologies and instruments, high-speed internet, etc. So it's just a question I've been struggling with lately, that how much do we, again, as architects, have to step outside of the kind of boundaries that we've set lately to look at that wider infrastructure and how that plays into this conversation. So.
Yeah. I mean, no, we try, but maybe we can all try a bit. It's a very beautiful and interesting question. I mean, behind the scenes of what Beatriz and I were saying was that modern architects were not inventing much. They were transmitting, maybe, to use Guillermo's words, sanitary reform of the 19th century, which was itself echoing a long tradition of plague defense. So in that sense, you could say infrastructure is organizing the city in response to disease, and architecture is somehow conveying that, communicating that, repeating that, synchronizing that. So from that perspective, the architect is always positioned as a figure, as a kind of philosophical figure, reflecting upon change that's already occurred and somehow conveying it and normalizing it and kind of making it part of a kind of an everyday, not in a negative sense, it seems to me, and Beatriz always reminds me of this, that modern architecture saved millions of lives. Even though the theory it was based on was...
Antibiotics too, they save millions of lives. The question we are saying is that at a certain point, like antibiotics, she created its own monsters that did not exist before. There was not bacteria resisting antibiotics because there was no antibiotics, so you create a problem. Same thing when we went indoors. Of course, we went indoors because we are so fragile, as we discovered, but it had consequences, right? So certain ways we improve in other ways we had to. So it's always the same. Architecture deals with certain problems and then creates others, right? And in terms of the scale, of course, architecture has always gone. What did the Italians say in the 70s? From the spoon to the territory. Yeah, I mean it's all the scales and more. No, I mean when you think about the great epidemics or whether it's the Black Plague or it's territorial first, like how do you close the city, how you establish the controls, etc. Then architecture at the level of the lazaretos, the people that are suspected from being sick or sick and they are enclosed there. I mean, all these structures then remain. So there we are. We go to Italy and we go like, look at this beautiful lazaretto, look at this beautiful thing, but we forget how much of this was put in place in response to. And likewise in London, as I say, all this infrastructure, so it's at all levels. It could be the same. You talk about Zoom, but one can talk about the bed, the way in which all of a sudden the bed became this place of work, of socializing. I mean, the only space that most people had in which they could work and socializing is the bed. Many people don't have their own apartment, or they are sharing the apartment, or they're in a family, or whatever it is, but it became like this private space in which you could transmit. There was another question over here.
But just a quick point. I mean, I think the thing about scale, I'm interested in figures like Andreas Harker and others who argue that the architect is the person who has a familiarity with relationships between scales.
Yeah.
So rather than say, well, we are not infrastructural, therefore who knows to what extent we are valuable, the value of the architect is in sort of the transscalar interrelationships. And in that sense, it's hard to find anyone better than an architect because she's able to feel these scales. Maybe we are trying to expand it a little bit to go down to the microbial and now to outer space. But this seems to me where architects have a very beautiful intelligence and we maybe more need for architects now than before.
I was just thinking that in that sense, actually what this work does to me is dismounting the idea that architecture can be defined as only looking at buildings. So architecture by itself, like it does participate in many other quote unquote constructive disciplines. So and the architect at the same time does have consciousness, even in maybe repressed, or is participating also within all those discourses. So how to engage or re-engage with them, that's part of it, right?
Yeah. Finally.
Sorry.
Hi. Thanks for this fascinating series of thoughts. Something I'm wondering is in relation to this idea that architecture shapes bodies and creates norms, how does biotic architecture respond to this idea? And will architecture continue to shape bodies if architecture has to deal with microbes rather than bodies?
Yeah, of course you can, because we are microbes too, right? I mean, so we are talking about, in the terms of Andres, it would be like a trans-species collaboration. So what is a biotic architecture? We don't know yet, but there are many experiments. For example, you may go to Madrid and look at the schools that Andres Hake has done there using fungi and which are even certain species are changing their migration and all these new butterflies and insects, and the kids are fascinated, of course, by this new. But there are other ways of engaging with bacteria, and it doesn't mean excluding the human. The human is part of this trans-species, let's say, collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, we have the same question as you, but imagine, for example, we make a picture of this room. It's a picture you only see microbes, right? So just bacteria even. Let's forget about fungi and viruses, we only see bacteria. You would see, of course, perfectly the microbes in an intestine. Actually, the microbes in our colon is the greatest density of microbes anywhere in the biosphere. So just when you thought we're going to get rid of human exceptionalism, watch out, because the colon, which is directly connected to our brains, has the most microbes. Even
More than any other
any other species, and any other place.
No comparison.
There's no right. So you would see perfectly our ridiculously tortuous intestines, right? You'd see that, and then you'd see clouds of microbes coming out all of our orifices. You would see the skin and so on, right? You would see the microbes that are on my eyeball looking at you, and the microbes on your eyeball looking back, which are connected to our brain, right? Then you would see them in the air, falling mainly in the dust. And every time we move, they're coming up again. So you would see this extraordinary cloud. Then you would see on all of the surfaces whole cities of microbes, right? Organized in layers, surviving, some sleeping, some awake. Then inside the paint, you will see more. And inside all of the building materials, you'll see the microbes. Then inside all of the tubes and the wires. So still, we're looking at this one picture. This picture would be the highest resolution picture of architecture ever produced, right? It would be unambiguously architecture. You would see spaces, bodies, buildings. You would see them like you've never seen before, right? So this question, what's going to happen then to the body and to the building? Well, firstly, we would see them, right? We haven't yet seen them. Right, we haven't yet talked to them. If you look at Le Corbusier, he draws many times the intestine. He's got a bit of an obsession with it. But we would. I'm just saying. So the body changes. Our understanding of what the body is becomes. Our body is also collaborative. Our body is nothing without all the others in this room. Most microbes live about 20 minutes. So this portrait is constantly flickering. So all of these patterns, which are very precise, are being maintained by, Buckman Fuller said once, I'm so happy to come back. We could have said it tonight, right? We're so happy to come back to the AA, but the only thing that he brought back to the AA that was the same as when he was before was his name and his glasses. Everything else had been replaced, right? So if we think the building that way, and we think the body that way, and we think that they are not separable, who knows what happens? We have the same question. Who knows what happens? But just the idea that we thought the body was what it is, that we think it is so stupid. It's so not that. Right? It's just so not that. We have little rooms in every building, including this one, to make some kind of encounter with our excrement. But boy, we don't want to talk about it. Right? So actually, there's no evidence that architects really want to talk about the body. And I don't think there's much evidence that they want to talk about buildings.
With that, we'll go.
Thank you, Mark and Beatriz, and for the panel as well. I have a question that has to do with the way in which you conceptualize the work that you're doing in relationship to the other ways in which bacteria have been conceptualized. I'm thinking of two different understanding of bacteria. The first one, of course, Pasteur. And in the pasteurization of France, Bruno Latour indicates beautifully how the real invention, the real discovery is the possibility of pasteurizing France, multiplying the networks through which all his scientific insight can become a complete transformation of an architecture, in that case, a national architecture. And the second way in which I'm thinking the question of how you imagine bacteria is, of course, Lynn Margulis. And I was surprised not to hear Lynn Margulis tonight, in the way that she reimagined what are the units of life, and there's only one, bacteria. And there are different associations of bacteria, different ways in which we can think of societies of bacteria. Bacteria by themselves, bacteria with other kind of bacteria that become fungi, bacteria with other kinds of bacteria that become algae, and so on, and all the way to humans, which is a completely different way of conceptualizing bacteria than Pasteur. And your bacteria seems to me very architectural bacteria, some kind of society that needs to be homed. So I was wondering how you would somehow, if you could say something about how your way of conceptualizing bacteria from architecture intercepts and articulates a discourse with other bacteriological discourses.
Yeah. Well, definitely those are our plain, the pasteurization of France is really very much part of both books. And Martigolles is like our patron saint.
It's a goddess.
It's our goddess. So everything is among the most influential thinkers that we have in our book, right?
Yeah.
It's fully represented. We didn't think we have to reproduce Margolis here or Latour. Other than in the way in which Pasteur and Co were presented in very quickly ways here. They are part of the book.
Yeah, a very big part of the book is to position. I don't know if Latour is a god, but Margolis is a goddess for sure. And in the book there's a very, very precise, even pedantic history of Margolis's position in relationship to 19th century science, in which a key figure is Patrick Geddes, in fact. So for us, the discussion of the kind of politics of microbes through Margolis, which has a history. This history is not separate from an architectural history. So this is so you're right to say we treat bacteria as if from a kind of architectural point of view. We try to show how Margolis does too, and that she's part of an architectural tradition. And if, the answer to every question should be, well, you should buy the book. But I really don't think you should. What's nice to be with you and it's interesting that it's the first bookstore that has the book. It's not in any other bookstore. No.
Because it just came out.
It's not even out in bookstores yet. So it's here. For us, it's all very symbolic. But because it's here, you don't have to buy it, right? Because we can talk about it instead of buying it. But
you will be able to buy it after this lecture.
No, but it's what Beatriz says, to really say what we feel about Margolis, we would need so much time to elaborate the argument. But think about this possibility. And it is one of the more important claims in the book. Microbes invented interior 4.5 billion years ago. I don't know what you think interior means, but presumably in opposition to exterior, you could only produce an interior by producing the sense of exterior. So it's an inside. You can only produce an interior from what then becomes the outside. Interior has to be a way of digesting the world. So interior is not an enclosure separate from the world, but a way of eating the world. Right? This is microbes. So microbes digest the world, and in so doing produce what appears to be a room, portable room, that might only last for 20 minutes. But think, E. coli that repeats itself, replicates itself every 20 minutes, in 36 hours would cover the world and be heavier than the biosphere. Right? So an enormous capacity for this little thing, which is just digesting the world. So we read architecture as digestion. Talking about the shit in the intestine is not like a kind of metaphor or something. It is what architecture is. Architecture is a way of eating the world. And this way of eating the world produces what seems like an interior. Only a bunch of idiots would then say, oh, the inside is completely different from the outside. That's the Le Corbusier drawing of the hermetic, right? So if you understand architecture as a form of digestion, then okay, and I don't know what follows from that, but it's very much a homage to Lynn Margulis.
It is, but you're right in the sense that we are writing about microbes from the point of view of architecture, unlike both Latour or Margulis, right? And therefore we are bringing something very different, even if we learn from Margulis and from Latour, is a completely different approach, and an approach also that has consequences, because it starts from the realization that in this crisis that we are right now, this medical crisis, this extreme crisis, that for some of the scientists that we are working on is much more serious than climate change. It's called the silent extinction of microbes. That's what Martin Miller,
Martin Blaser,
Blaser and others have called it. And the theory of many of those scientists is that it will kill us first than climate change. Then, and architecture, which is the second part that the scientists were not so aware of at that time, that architecture is so deeply implicated in this reduction of the diversity of bacteria. Then we have an obligation of the same dimensions that the architects that were born around the time of the crisis of tuberculosis took upon themselves. They took upon themselves, for better or for worse, to say 1 in 3 is dying of tuberculosis, and architecture is implicated. 19th century architecture was responsible for many of the health problems. And for once we were useful, right? Because at the time that there was not antibiotics, modern architecture came with a set of ideas of how to deal with this in collaboration with doctors and with biologists, which is very interesting, and about time that we start thinking that way too. And you know, I mean, there are very beautiful examples now. Look, I'm thinking, of course, of the Maggie centers, but you know, I mean, about time that architecture and medicine starts to talk to each other, because there are so many ways in which we can collaborate and make a better place.
I was thinking another way to put it, and I actually totally agree with what Mark and Beatriz have said, but it's maybe, I don't know, like maybe it's true that it's an architectural bacteria, but what I'm pretty sure is that it also defines architecture through the bacteria, which hasn't been done as now. And since definitions are relational, that redefines also the bacteria per se, right? So I don't know, it also redefines the bacteria, but I think the key instrument is like architecture from the eyes or from the point of view of the bacteria as the subject of architecture. And once you do that, the concept of bacteria also changes by definition, right?
Yeah.
So, and that, of course, it's part of a longer genealogy of bacteriologists, but this application to architecture, which it's clear, but nobody has met before, I think it works both ways. It transmits, right, to the field of architecture history and architecture as a field, but also to bacteria, because why? Yeah.
It's interesting that for us, I mean, the whole thing started with biologists, precisely. I mean, I was a fellow at the Business of College, which is an institute for advanced studies in Berlin, finishing my book on X-ray architecture. When most of the fellows there, well, there were some people in the humanities that I already knew what they were saying because I'm familiar with their discourse. No, but there was all these biologists, and they became fascinated with the whole question of tuberculosis and modern architecture. And they started asking me, when did the architects stop talking with biologists, with scientists, with doctors? And I said, well, I haven't thought about that. But then I thought that it's probably at the same time that that streptomycin, which became the first antibiotic effective against tuberculosis, was discovered, which is 43, but it's the middle of the war. So until mid-century, really, until the 50s, you know, once you had a pill, you know, architecture was not that necessary. We didn't. And then they say, but you know, there is a serious problem now with the microbiome and the microbiome of buildings, and there is very little research on that, but we would like you to be part of our team. So that's when we start collaborating with these scientists on the question of the microbiome of building and the consequences of the diminishing diversity of bacteria on health, and wrote this article. So it's interesting that it didn't come, I'm going to work on bacteria. It didn't come from So it came from this.
And it's a kind of truth in advertising thing. I think we have to say, we don't think like there's this amazing world of bacteria that scientists have all this amazing knowledge of it, and architects should be less stupid and learn from this.
Yeah. No.
Our feeling is
collaborate.
these people have been working on architecture for a long time.
Yeah.
They're really thinking about what is an interior, what's the relationship, what is entanglement, particularly Lynn Margulis, what is entanglement, what does it mean to be, to live, to be entangled. For us, that sounds like architecture.
And that's kind of like a disciplinary responsibility, right? When an entire field is dedicating an enormous amount of research to, as you said, like actually looking at what architecture is, in very tangible terms, like we, as a field, we have a responsibility to understand what they're saying, right? And I mean, I think the same can arguably be said, you know, of what's happened over the past, at least since 2012, with like how kind of heavily financialized and economized architecture has become. Like, we need to understand how our discipline is not just being understood, but is also being kind of wielded by others.
Right.
You said something, Beatriz, in the discussion of sick architecture, and I quickly jotted it down because I thought it was such a great phrase. When you were describing these big warehouses that were being transformed into hospitals, and you said, well, they were waiting for bodies. And then you swiftly moved on in your presentation, start talking about bacteria coming across and finding their bodies. And I think what's so lovely and so in keeping with the world of Bruno Latour and Margulis and all of this is you're asking us to exercise quite peculiar shifts in scale, where at moments we imagine ourselves as the human body, which is there's a building waiting for our body inside. But then on the other hand, we are equally the building waiting for the bodies of the bacteria inside, and either good or not so great host for that. So there's a kind of, and you've used the word entanglement a few times. I think and again, coming to the kind of broader question of the discipline, there's a real fundamental shift there where you ask all of us to see ourselves both as the inhabitant and the shelter simultaneously, and to be both inhabitant and shelter simultaneously is a flip of our disciplinary thinking.
I love the way you put things. You should come with me and give the lecture. Fantastic.
I felt the same way when these guys were talking. It's not that, you know, the 100 trillion microbes, they're not our microbes. Right? We don't host those microbes, they host us. Right? So the human species became possible relatively recently, maybe 200,000 years, as a kind of experiment. It's a microbial experiment, maybe reaching its end or not. But so you know, if you have a child, you could not treasure anything more, right? But it's somehow not yours either, right? It's somehow that suspended in this in flux, in entanglement, and then you have care, right? And so the question is, if architecture is a form of care, what would that be? And that care would not be to put that child in a box, sealed off from the world, nor would it be to let the child just run around the streets of London at night, right? What would it be? So what would be the combination, you know, what would be an architecture that sometimes shelters, sometimes opens? Why would all the different parts of a building be the same? Maybe going to the other half of your house would be like traveling to the other side of the world. You know, like there wouldn't be, I mean, just as architecture shouldn't be a monoculture, a single building might not be a monoculture either. It might be a place of
I'll give you an example that is, we didn't put it in, we did put a little bit of it in the book, but it's a very fascinating example speaking about kids. You know the area in Finland and in Russia now called Kairela? Yeah, it was
Karelia.
Karelia. Guillermo's wife is from Finland, so I better be careful. It was split after the war into parts, and one part ended up in Finland and the other part ended up in Russia, and it was a very rural area. And then it was a fascinating study that they did recently, in which they study the children in one side and in the other. The people in the Russian part, they remain rural and they were close to the ground. The people in the Finnish part, they become industrialized very quickly, live in modern architecture, separated from the ground, etc. The kids on the side of Finland, they all have autoimmune disorders, allergies, etc., and all kinds of disorders that are typical of the Western thing. The people in the other side, they don't have any of that. So it's very interesting because it's the same genetic pool. These people were born in the same area, they are the same thing, they were artificially divided. That you have a population not only of kids but of grown-ups with very, very different health outcomes. So you have there the clearest example that some of what we are doing, where it's good to be clean. I mean, we are not, we are not stupid in the sense that, of course, you have to be hygienic and you have to do this and I'm not anti-washer, I'm not any of that. But, there is something that we are doing that is bad clearly, and you have it very clearly demonstrated in these situations that some of the contemporary problems we have created with architecture and with urbanization, and that there are ways in which we can counter them by an architecture that is less.
Can I actually ask you both a question? I wonder about kind of the temporality of the transformation of the global microbiome that you're speaking about. I mean, you've spoken how kind of quickly it can disappear, right, in Karelia. But have there been any experiments to reintroduce bacteria into environments? And I wonder kind of what the transition from an antimicrobial or an antibiotic to a biotic society would look like. Or I guess I'm wondering, like, will there be a lot of sickness that happens temporarily and then will it normalize? I guess just have there been any experiments in that you're aware of?
They're already happening at the level of what you eat and everything. You go into any place around here and they are all selling you kombucha and kimchi and I don't know. So at a popular level, in what you put in your body is already happening, right? We are all taking probiotics are there. So this is super fascinating. People are much more careful about antibiotics. They used to give you antibiotics over the counter in places like Spain or Italy. I mean, like you could ask for it. Yeah. And now no, right? I mean, so the question is architecture, right? In which way can architecture start intervening for us, right? For our field.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of points, Nick. I mean, one is that every time there's been a extinction event on the planet, and as you can see, we tried to document those events, has been followed by an increase in biodiversity. So human fear about that we are killing off the biodiversity of the planet and we're about to we are creating the conditions for another mass extinction event, not good for the humans, but it's totally fine for the planet. The planet is very likely to use that. So one argument would be that microbes are setting up this experiment by which they will increase their biodiversity by having our species, the human, allow itself to kind of kill off most species and so on. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is I think it's not reversible. Most experiments in rewilding are catastrophic. Right. So the idea that you can. So we write in the book about this. So this shit bank experiment, which basically says we need to preserve the microbes that hunter-gatherers in Tanzania and Amazon still have, because they are microbes that we don't know what they do, but we might know in the future, and therefore we can use them. The great ethical risk of this. Well, firstly, there's an ethical risk of what does it mean for the microbes of economically disadvantaged, non-white, non-northern communities living in the jungle to be now the source of a new kind of gold. Right? There's that question.
No, but
and they've addressed that.
They have addressed that because they have what is it called? Not the copyright.
In theory, you continues to have the rights over your own shit, but I think it's a complicated.
Legally, they have the rights. So if their microbes are used in any medical thing, this community, the money will go back to this community. So they addressed that issue, which I thought it was really
right. So but you have to kind of keep it in mind, right? And this, I suppose, and the second thing is that the idea that you could then put back into the human microbes that it has lost as a species seems to me the basis of a kind of science fiction movie. And most times rewilding, as you know, produces catastrophic, unhealthy rearrangements. So to some extent, I don't suppose we imagine that architects should now invent a kind of architecture that saves the planet and saves the species and is infinitely good forever and all of this, and we recover all the things that we lost. Like, it's not about nostalgia. It's not about recovering some lost, beautiful, healthy biodiversity, but it's just about being less stupid about the way we participate in this project, which is essentially a kind of genocidal project, right? And I'm not necessarily against genocide, right? I'm just saying.
What?
It needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed. The current relationship with bacteria is genocidal,
Okay.
right? So we can't we can't all selectively use the word, right? So there's a whole series of ethical questions, which are also creative questions, intellectual questions, scientific questions, technical questions, and so on. And there's an incredibly open set of futures. And I love your question because it basically kind of says, well, wait a minute. And I think we feel the same way. Wait a minute. At some sort of stupid level, I think we argue that a biodiversification of strategies, of philosophies, of attitudes is the healthy thing to do. Not that there is a certain kind of architecture that's healthy and that we should all do it, right? We genuinely don't know what it would mean to produce a biotic architecture.
Well, that's why we're at a school with students.
We can take it. If somebody is
Oh, I see. Yep, a hand back there.
Hi. Hello. Thank you so much.
We don't,
Hi.
we don't see you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so
Hi.
much. Great to listen to you. Just anecdotally, I just found out yesterday that one of the most expensive base fragrances for perfumers is called civet, which is an extracted, it's an extracted compound from the fecal glands of a tropical mammal. So actually this kind of, and it's used in men's perfume, so actually this kind of musky, sexy smell of men is actually tropical feces from a mammal, which has all the possible planetary politics in there. But my question was actually different. You just prompted it with this kind of gold
that's too
rush
good.
towards shit.
That's too
Isn't it
good.
just great? But my question was actually to do with self-correction and biotic architecture. That is to say, there's this kind of beautiful kind of laughter of hindsight that happens, especially in the history of medicine, where it's like, oh, we thought that this was going to be the cause of X, and now we know that it's Y and ha, And to a certain extent, this all of what we've been talking about has also an element of this, right? Like we thought that we needed to clean everything. Here's all the Italian cleaning products, and now ha. And so I wonder whether there's a way of sort of coding into biotic architecture a form of self-correction, which would kind of error correct for future ha, in a sense, which then would make it a lot more biotic, right? Because this is in a way how ecosystems function. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Do you want to? I mean, I think it's very beautiful and important point you're making. It's kind of like in self-defense, I would say, we tried very, very hard not to be prescriptive and just to say, this is a question. When we are with these microbiologists and so on, and we keep challenging them to tell us what they think the word healthy means. Not one expert we've ever talked to has even risked an answer. They just say, we don't know. And these are not, and they're not just researchers. Some of them, like Martin Blazer, are really politically promoting, selling a lot of books, trying to alert people to this crisis. But when you say to him, what constitutes a healthy person or body or society, they say, we don't know. So in an age in which the experts on health don't have a singular idea of what it means, we certainly can't in architecture say, okay, here's the medicine, the healthy medicine for architecture. And I think, maybe tonight you are our self-correction, right? Because you're sort of warning, and I think we really embrace that warning. But that's what I guess what I mean by don't buy the book. I mean it in the sense that we don't intend to be we don't intend to be followed, right? It is a manifesto. It's an unquestioned, probably a more important book than Are We Human? It is a manifesto and all of that, but it's more like a shaking the pot thing, and then hopefully people react in ways we can't predict. And that would be the self-correction from our side, right? Which is just never to have said, here's a good thing, now go and do it.
Right.
Because you're so right, tomorrow will be,
it's already implying many of the things that we have said, that it's always this. Architects have always been like this, it's the paradox of architecture that, as Ward Richardson said already in the 19th century, it creates illnesses. And nevertheless, the architect always presents itself or herself or whoever as a healer, right? And nevertheless creates always another problem, right? It's also interesting that the architects and that were involved in the exhibition of We the Bacteria, they were not trying to present answers either. It was very interesting that all the space that we had at the end of the exhibition, which is more like a laboratory, were experiments in possibilities. Nobody was claiming this is what you need to do. Nobody's doing that anymore, I don't think.
yeah.
I mean, some people do that, but no.
I mean, I think a sign of intelligence from the architectural field is something like hesitation or a statement of we are not sure. And that was implied in the earlier question. What is an architect? What's the role? I mean, I think we are absolutely not sure. This is why we think we are teachers basically, right? So the idea is, as teachers, perhaps we can change the conversation a bit. And maybe it's urgent, but it doesn't mean we know what we're talking about.
I'm tempted not to finish on that, but I don't.
I think Guillermo wanted to say something.
No, I just wanted to say that a lot of the works, it just made me think of the works at the exhibition, and I think what they had in common is that they all raise awareness about bacteria. They don't say, oh, this is how you should build, or this is how we actually solve the problem. No, it's actually this, like this piece of work, architectural work, takes into account bacteria in a certain aspect, not in the totality either. And you think the work of Andres also with the silica and the glass, and just raising awareness and being aware of those entanglements rather than solving them, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you. So I think for the kind of mental and intellectual and the gut microbiome of our guests, we should probably call it an evening.
For everybody.
Thank you very much. There are drinks in the back, as well as books. And if everyone will join me in a massive round of applause. And thank you.
Thank you.